You are listening to NewMusicBox from New Music USA, presented in collaboration with Dublab Radio as part of a series where we feature conversations, DJ mixes, articles, and live performances that explore the current landscape of music composition.
I think it's good to not pay attention, Mark.
Whoop-de-boop-de.
Well, it is wonderful to be here. So I'm here with Mark Mothersbaugh, and we're going to be talking about everything from composing to postcards and how we end up colliding with these different worlds. So, Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm peachy. Yeah, it's a good day, actually.
What has been good about the day so far?
Oh, well, I have to fast today, so it makes me stop myself from walking into one room in particular, which I won't mention the name of it, that has things to eat in it.
How? Oh, okay, not the toilet.
Oh, no. I wasn't thinking of that.
How often do you fast?
Not that often. We'll see. We'll see how long this lasts. If we can erase all of this, we could just start over right now, and I'd be very happy. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really good. I had a good morning of meditation and writing, which is something I do every morning. Like, actually, the first thing I do before I get on, phones or computers or whatever is meditate and write. And it really makes a big difference, I find, anyway.
What do you write?
Well, anything from poems to what happened yesterday, part journal, but also any lyrics or any ideas. Yeah, just whatever, really, whatever comes out.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's something we have a little bit in common. I have something where I make myself write or draw or put information down on cards every day.
And do you always do that in the morning? No.
What usually happens is I'm working on something, and now Zoom makes it so easy to be be working on a project, but at the same time doing something else. You see people moving their hands a little bit, and you're like, they're up to something. For what happens to me is if I don't do it, I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I go, oh my God, I forgot to do that today. So I have to go. So then I get up and I draw or I write something down.
Is that ever also music, or is it usually postcards and words for postcards and things like that?
Well, it started on cards back in the late 60s. I got into mail art was something that it was called back in the days, and people would put some artwork on a postcard and put a 2-cent stamp on it, I think it took back in those days. And you put it in the mail and send it to somebody, and it could be somebody you don't know or somebody you do know. There were some artists like Rauschenberg and different people that you could send them something, and then you could be an unknown 18-year-old kid in Akron, Ohio, and get something back, and it was very shocking and empowering in a way. It was exciting anyhow. So
yeah.
So I started doing that, and then it has a lot to do with music and art for me. I mean, I started keeping them because I used to just mail them out. I started keeping them after I wrote this song, Uncontrollable Urge, one night while Devo and I, the day before we rehearsed, and then we rehearsed it, and I came home after Devo was playing it, and I wrote a second verse down on a card, and I mailed it out the next day, and then I got to rehearsal that night, and I could not remember the second verse. So it's like, it ended up so that song only has one verse. I sing the same verse twice.
No,
yeah,
because you sent the verse to Rauschenberg.
Somebody got it, yeah.
Mark, that's
horrible,
cool,
huh?
But
Horrible. Also
amazing that you had this perfect verse that you will never see again.
Well, it's long gone. I let go of it a long time ago. Yeah, and so then I started collecting that stuff and thought, well, it's kind of going to be like an image and an idea and a thought bank. So
And would those things just come to you? Like, is it the classic thing, which I definitely experience, where you feel like you got an antenna up there and then you're picking up on something and, you know, you just capture it?
Yeah, I mean, through the years, I mean, we're talking like 50 plus years or something now. But through the years, you know, it changed from being like automatic writing or being on purpose, kind of like, I kind of always wished I was a few years older and I could have been a beatnik. And I missed it by just a few years. And then it was like hippies came along. And so I kind of had to settle for that for a while. But I always thought beatnik writing and their thoughts had kind of influenced pop music and especially all of the bands that were coming out after that in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I thought they, you know, their lyrics, I mean, their poems sounded like lyrics for things that showed up later. I don't know. So I always liked that. And so I started, but I kept everything then. And so now I have a unwieldy collection of information on cards.
Wow.
There you go. That ought to...
I knew about your cards from a perspective of postcards and artwork and ideas, but I'd never realized they also went into your songwriting and composing as well. So that's really interesting. It's like having an artistic bank of all your material.
Yeah, because oftentimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I've got this perfect idea for a piece of music or some lyrics or something, and I go, I gotta write that down. I wish I wasn't so tired. And then I don't do it, and then it's not there the next day. It went somewhere else. Somebody else got the idea, I guess, or went to another brain instead of mine.
Have you written any of those down? Like, have you?
Yeah. I try to make myself get up and do it, and I keep stuff handy so that it makes it easier.
I have that in a different way where... Not so much in the middle of the night, thankfully, because I'd probably also miss it. But I remember a time like being in a group of people in Portugal with friends and family, and then just suddenly being like, oh, I've got to go to the other room. There's a song that's there. And yeah, it feels weird. You also feel like a kind of antisocial weirdo to be like, I have to leave. And but yeah, so many songs have come out, words, melody, like the whole thing, where I'll record it and then afterwards I'll go back and listen to the recording and then write out the lyrics from the recording, because like all the words, everything's already there. And almost weirdly, it feels like sometimes the arrangement is inherent within that. It's like the song comes, I'm already hearing the string arrangement or you know, the builds and the swells, and that's really an interesting thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that just wrote me off as being autistic anyhow, so it all works out.
Do you remember the first thing you ever wrote?
Kind of, yeah. I was like 12 or 13. I'd seen the Beatles, and after a few mishaps, I finally bought a Beatle album. And I used to go down in the basement and turn the stereo up really loud and pretend that I was the fifth Beatle, and that when one of them needed to take a break on stage, they'd look over and point at me, and I'd come over and they'd hand me their instrument, whoever it was, and I'd keep playing their part for them, and then they'd go smoke a cigarette and drink some coffee, and then they'd come back. But I had just gotten an album by The Cream, and there was a long solo, and I wrote a song that had some chords in it, and then it had a really long solo in it, and then it came back and had a few chords that ended it.
What was the Cream song?
What was the name of it? I feel like it was named after a reptile, or maybe that's what I called mine. I can't remember now. I'd have to go look at the album again.
Was it just music? Was it instrumental?
It was instrumental, yeah. That was the first thing. Yeah, there was a home organ in our house, and so I could play it on the organ and pretend I could hear the drums and the other people, and then I'd just kind of be sitting there for this whole long drum solo, and then it would come back in at the end. So it had like probably about a minute's worth of my participation in the music, and then this unknown drummer did the rest of the song.
And do you feel like you've always have you always approached composing or music hearing the whole world of it as opposed to just individual parts? It's like you hear the whole thing?
Not always. Sometimes it's just, a scrap of a melody, and then it turns into the theme song for a film you're working on or a song you're working on. You know, sometimes it's just a small idea, and then you elaborate on it. You don't know what it is until you finish working. How about you? You hear instrumental stuff first. Is that it?
No, sometimes it can be a poem, which then feels like it's a song, or sometimes it can be, you hear fragments of the music first. I would say the thing that happens often is that it comes as a whole, very much. I can see it almost like a film. There are a few songs where, one in particular called To Be Saved, which was like either a 4-act play or a film, and it was so cinematic, and it wasn't my story, but it was a very, very specific story that was quite dark and intense and specific. And it came, the whole thing, and I kind of listened to it, or I played it back, and I was like, whoa, well, what's that? And I remember calling my mom up. I was like, Mom, I have this song, and it's either terrible or it might be kind of interesting. And I played it to her over the phone, and at the end she was like, whoa, where did that come from? And I always had that visual. I think that's maybe what it is, that visual story component, where it's like you see the whole thing as a play, or you see as much the visuals as you hear the music.
How long was it?
It was like 5 minutes. I was invited to play a show at the Marquee Club in celebration of it was a Jack Kerouac festival with all these beats.
All the old beatniks.
Who was still alive. And I'd just written this song, and I was like, maybe this is too heavy for this audience. But then I ended up playing it, and this composer called David Amram was accompanying me on flute. And at the end of the song, he's like, okay, you're coming out to play my New York show. And, on the basis of that track. So that was my first American performance as a teenager. Yeah.
Not bad.
Do you feel like do you see music? I
think all the different senses overlap. Yeah. And, oftentimes it started with Devo for sure. We sometimes had ideas for a film before we had ideas for the song, and we would then write a song to allow us to be able to film the film we wanted to make. So yeah, I see that stuff overlapping. Do you?
Yeah, definitely. With Raw Space, with this anti-stream from the Bell Labs anechoic chamber as this live 360 AR stream, I saw the visual worlds of the songs I wanted to create, not even as music videos, but as visual landscapes, taking people into these landscapes of the tracks. And it was so exciting to be able to bring that back into the record experience in this digital age where we kind of lost all of that. That really informed which songs I then brought into the chamber, which ones I wrote. And it very much influenced the arranging, the production, because suddenly you got this whole room to fill. So it made you think about, how you were arranging the tracks. For me, I think I've just never been able to disconnect the whole sensory experience of music. As you said, it's like all the senses or the ways that we're engaging with material, they're all kind of interconnected. And so when you take the visual or the tangible or the ceremonial out of the music experience, which we did when we moved from physical to digital, it's like, how can you bring that back into the equation? Because I feel like that's almost the scene setting for the song. That sets up the music having this whole other kind of stage for it in a way. Yeah,
I could see that. It's like, I think it kind of explains why a lot of the kids that write digitally would come over here just so they could look at this thing that was down in the basement, Tonto. A friend of mine, Bob Margoloff and Malcolm Cecil had built it in the early 70s, and it was this really visual, interesting. It looked like you were inside an eyeball, a giant orb, so it's almost like you were in a Sputnik or something. And it was old tube technology, a mixture of Buchla and Moog and ARP and a couple other companies. And people would come over and they'd play with that stuff, and it was more tactile, and they're patching chords, but they almost always ended up leaving and having the same realization, is that that was a really hard way to make music.
Yeah.
And, you couldn't keep your sounds the next day, they would change, even if the settings were the exact same, just electricity or the temperature or humidity would change the sound. And so they gained more respect for their digital world. And, it's like, I like it all. It's all kind of like, different kinds of paint.
Oh, definitely. I was thinking more about how digital took out the physical art form. And
that's what, but this is like the difference. And then they're like crawling around, plugging things in, dialing knobs instead of just looking at a list of created sounds that people tend to do, because you get into a digital synth these days and they're very deep, and just making little changes is much more complex than it was with the simple early Brontosaurus type synthesizers.
And you built your own instruments.
Yeah, that came a little later, but yeah.
Tell me a bit about that, because that's like adding a whole other layer of constructing what you're hearing in your head.
Yeah, a couple things happened at the same time is how that ended up happening for me. One of them was I just was alarmed at all of the old, beautiful, majestic pipe organs that were being dismantled. And on eBay, at least, they were being turned into like, they'd take these beautiful 150-year-old wooden pipes and saw them up and turn them into birdhouses and spice racks. And I was panicking over it. And at first I just bought all I could. I bought thousands of organ pipes off of these things that had been torn apart, like churches and schools and different institutions that like had gone, well, do we pay $20,000 to have all the leather on the bellows redone, or do we buy a $300 Korg synth that has choir and church organ and cathedral all set on it? So we just put it under our arm and carry it in and set it on top of the decommissioned keyboard that's there now. So I started buying that stuff, and then I also just collect sound making things, instruments and otherwise. And I've done like about 200 TV series. About 100 TV series and almost 100 films and a whole bunch of video games, for PlayStation and all the different formats they have. And I just kind of got bored with working with the same instruments and the same people and the same bands, all the time. And the idea of putting stuff together like that, I took organ pipes that were mismatched and I took like about 60 bird calls. And at first I was recording them, but then it sounded kind of fake, because people have sophisticated sense of, hearing now anyhow. They know when it's a drum machine instead of a real human playing the drums, because the snare never sounds exactly the same from beat to beat. There's little differences. You hit it lighter or harder or off to the side or something, and it changes the tone just enough that you can tell the difference when it's a human or if it's just the machine playing. And so when the bird calls all had the exact same intonation, I found somebody that had helped me repair a calliope that I had once, this guy got into helping me make mechanical, mechanisms, just these mechanisms that would blow air through the bird calls and through the pipes and stuff. And then it just kept going bigger. I started collecting doorbells. I got a good collection of American doorbells, which sound totally different from East European doorbells. I bought a bunch of them in Prague and in Hungary and Poland. I have a bunch of Polish old, like World War II era doorbells, and they sounded totally different. So I started putting those together as instruments. And
why specifically America and Eastern Europe?
Those are the ones I could find. They were I don't know what doorbells sound like in China, to be honest. Well, probably our doorbells sound like Chinese doorbells, but those were the ones I could find. Yeah. I could find those in like flea markets and antique stores and other places. And so, I just started making instruments like that, and you can make things that don't sound like anything else and that you couldn't play on any other instrument. So,
well, and in a way that's like the antithesis of what the technology era has ushered in, which is a lot of very well emulated pads and sound banks and everything like that.
Really good stuff, but you and 10 million other people all have the same sounds.
Absolutely.
You know, so that's what it was. It was just having more time on my hands than I needed, so kept me busy.
Just too much time, Mark.
Too much time, I know.
Definitely in the different projects, you know, technology has been a big aspect of the presentation of these worlds. But weirdly, on the music side, I really like to keep it as raw and almost minimal as possible. It's like it goes the totally other way. And like that specific chamber, that Bell Labs anechoic chamber, what I found so fascinating about that is you're in a space where there's no reverb, there's no EQ, there's no softening, there's literally nothing. You're in the rawest environment and you're listening. Firstly, you're listening to silence in a totally new way, because how often do we even hear silence these days?
Never.
Yeah.
I mean, not really, unless you're in a very remote location. You're correct. You never hear silence.
And so, when you reprogram yourself with the silence and you reset yourself, and that it was a space where Cage and all these people were doing experiments, sound experiments. And I really understood why, because it's this huge, huge chamber. And so you think something's going to be reflective, or there's going to be some pipe or whatever that bounces a certain frequency, and yet there's nothing. And it really changed my perception on a lot of things, and also made me very conscious of what you then bring into the silence. It's like when you start off with this amazing silence, you're like, wow, it has to be good enough to break the silence. And I think also just recording in that space, like I love being in environments where you record and the resonance and the history and all of that almost becomes part of the piece. Also like Montague Square and which became the jacket, the musical jacket. Is that something you think about as well? Like, do you think of where you're recording, and does that influence how you're approaching a piece? Yeah.
I mean, the building we're in right now, I've composed music here for almost 30 years now, and it is so far away from being a professional recording studio. It's like oftentimes I'm recording something for a film or some project in the other room here, like with a guitar or on some violins or something. And then we kind of have to do another take because that one had some truck out there backfiring or a helicopter went over. And there's something about that I really like, all that stuff. And sometimes I leave it in. And that's the other way to think about it, is all the sounds. And I don't know, maybe that's...
that's a lovely anti-echo chamber where that becomes also part of the piece.
And some of it's, like just unplanned. And I kind of like surprises. So I don't have any place that's very quiet here.
If you're recording it at Abbey Road versus, Air, or like, are there things where also that has a particularly good environment for strings? Or
I've done a lot of animation, and oftentimes you want a big orchestra. Not always, but Abbey Road, for instance, has a different sound than Air Studio, which is, just kind of on the other side of town. And you use one or the other for specific reasons. They both sound great. I think of Air Studio as being a little crisper, and I think of Abbey just having a little bit of just natural reverb in the room, which can be good or bad with animation, because sometimes, you have things that stop and start really fast, and, you want it to be really exact. So, I always think about the rooms. I always think about where I'm going to record.
As a conceptual artist, like, do you feel that changes how you approach these audio projects?
Yeah, there was one TV show. It was, I'll never do it again, but Devo was on tour and we had a touring bus, and the place where I could sit, when everybody went to sleep after the show, and then there was this one little area I could go to the back of the bus and I could set up my gear and I could set up my computer and look at pictures. I heard like this rumbling of like these big tires in the back and of the transmission back there, and I think it really affected the way I wrote the music for the show. And
in what way?
Well, it's like I was kind of shocked when I heard it after I sent it to them, and everything seemed like I had taken out bottom end, and I had left space because of that. I ended up making it a little more minimal than if I would have written the exact same music here in this room, for instance. I think, the more other stuff that gets added to it, like natural reverb and stuff, you take that into consideration and you leave space to accommodate it. I don't know, do you?
Yeah, that question to me.
I mean, that's the opposite side from your thing, because you were doing it totally clean, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, in the chamber, it was super clean.
Yeah, you start hearing your body.
You do. You hear the blood rushing through your veins. Apparently, none of the engineers could stay in there longer than 20 minutes because they start to go crazy. So then there must be something really weird with me, because I ended up staying in there hours, and now it's like 100 hours I've been in that room.
Maybe you're bloodless.
Have you got a knife? Let's test this theory.
No. Or maybe you just have clean arteries, and so
I think
it just moves through really without any struggle.
But then I did these performances, so that part of the music was being recorded in there for this anti-stream record experience. But then I was also doing these live performances in there where instead of the record triggering the live animations and these lyrics and artwork coming off the record player and the vinyl, they'd be coming off me and the guitar and out of my mouth. And then we'd invite the audience to come in and be in that space and to hear the music in that environment. And there were so many people, very seasoned producers or whatever, the usual types that were like, this is mind-blowing, because first just hearing sound in that way, and where like it's so directional that as soon as you turn even 90 degrees or less, it cuts off completely. So if I were to turn away from you, you would no longer hear it. But then also how today we're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to take out the imperfections and the ugly sound. The sound in the chamber, it was not pretty, but it was beautiful because it was so like unadulterated. And so I think people were really responding to that, like, oh wow, this is what sound sounds like without all the other stuff. So that was definitely an experience.
I like that. I've been in anechoic chambers before. My brother has one in Ohio.
Speaking of science, actually, the last time I was here with you, we were talking about how to turn particle collisions into something. So that was kind of odd. Yeah,
they're in the news right now for some reason.
I'm
trying to think about what it is. Something about antimatter.
It's that Mr. Antimatter has gone crazy.
Yeah, it was interesting talking to those guys. They think about something totally different than all the rest of us.
Oh, definitely. Well, they're thinking on like such a micro scale. It's a sort of fascinating paradox of how something so tiny can also be so immense.
Antimatter.
He was a big Devo fan.
You know what? You're right. That guy was a Devo fan.
Yeah, you set him on the path to be Mr. Antimatter.
I wonder how that's worked out. I think it's worked out okay. He seems to like the job, doesn't he? Or does he not? Can you remember? Did he like it?
He seemed to. Yeah, I think he liked it. I know he was very happy, but he was a lone sheep in the sun.
Yes. Nobody would hang around him. They're like, this guy's depressing. He's antimatter.
Talking about recording in different spaces, do you know Calm? It's like a meditation app. It helps people sleep and calm down. And
it's a mallet you order through the mail, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I ended up being their first content creator.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like doing sleep stories and soundtracks and different things. And for one of the stories, because I was writing the story, recording it, then doing the music, the sound effects, as we talked about, kind of building the whole world. But then I was like, I want to really take this out there. So a friend had ended up with Jacques Cousteau's first Baja vessel somehow. So then I was like, well, we should record it out at sea. And then the sounds of the waves, we can actually have the real sounds of the waves, and I'll write it around Cousteau, and it can have this sort of inspired part fiction, part related to him. And we'll record it on this boat, and it will tell this bigger story. So that was a lot of fun.
Wow, you've done a lot of kind of interesting alternate pathway music. I don't know how to describe it better than that, but it's like my musical instruments with foghorns seems modest by comparison.
Yeah, I don't know
out
about
at sea,
that.
up in outer space.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you got to put your tentacles out everywhere, Mark, you know. It's like we can be like mycelium. I think for me, I always saw music as just another form of storytelling. And so why wouldn't you weave it into these spaces that it doesn't usually exist in? Open up its world.
Yeah, I like that. I think one of the first things about you that kind of interested me is when you came over and you had a deck of cards that what you called your album. And I was like, dang, that's very cool. To me, that was something that Devo should have done at some time, but you got there first. You were more Devo than us.
Yeah, that was record as a deck of cards. Weirdly, like a few weeks ago, I saw that I think a big music company or label has just started releasing NFC-enabled song cards. And quite nicely, there are a few people that are like, oh, this is what Beatie did in whenever it was. But yeah, just thinking differently, which, you know, I'm talking to like the king of thinking differently. So it's no surprise we ended up making a postcard project together.
Yeah, that turned out to be, although it was a surprise for me, it was quite a surprise. It turned out to be interesting. And I don't know if you saw it there, but there's postcards that came in like in the last day or so that are labeled Postcard for Democracy.
No way. So they're still coming in.
Yeah, they won't give it up.
Well, it's a pretty important time to keep the pressure on. You know, we're not out of the woods.
No, we might be we might be like tumbling down a very dark path right now for all we know. We'll see what happens.
So Mark, very important question. Have you made a postcard or done some writing today?
Both, actually, yeah. Worked on some drums and a tuba today and also did the very last card of one more red book that'll go on a shelf in the Red Book Library.
How many red books are there now?
There's like somewhere close to 675 or 600 and few, somewhere in there.
And that's all of the cards?
Pretty much. All the ones I didn't mail out or lose. That's what I do, and that's why they call me Mr. Excitement, yeah.
That's why you're wearing your Mr. Excitement shirt.
Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely chatting. Have you got any last thoughts?
I like it when people think of new ways to make art and they use technology or they use something that's relating to the time we're in. I mean, I go backwards all the time. I'm using orchestras all the time that are like hundreds of years old. And even 100 years ago, the futurists were like going, orchestras. They're so old school, you know, they don't contain the instruments to properly represent the industrial world. So, you know, I write so much music for those old antiquated things, but I love it when, you know, you talk about ways that you first got into writing things, and I see the things that you do, and they impress me. You know, it's like I love all your connection to moving forward and moving outward. And, you know, as much as I love phones and the fact that there's this miracle thing like you can write music on your phone, you know, it makes it so democratic for everybody. You know, it's still, I like it when people just turn away and go find new stuff, and that's you.
Well, it's you too. I feel like thinking about the two simultaneously and often almost paradoxically, like what can we keep alive and revive, and then where can we innovate, sort of taking the best of the old and the best of the new. I think that's what really excites me. And something like NFTs, which I know you and I have discussed, it's like the worst of both those worlds. And so like, I think it's just that constant assessment of what is the stuff that we need to keep preserving and keep breathing life into, because we haven't, as human beings, got better through using technology. But then also, where can we use technology to be better human beings?
All good things to think about.
What are you working on at the moment? And you're probably working on so many things, but is there one thing that you're really most excited about that you're working on right now?
Well, yes. I'm making a book that is basically about the postcards that we were talking about. That's the thing that I'm kind of enjoying a lot. And I'm committed to a 1,600-page book.
Wow.
I decided to put music in the book, and I think there's going to be around 200 pieces of music that 2/3 of them nobody's ever heard, because for the last 30 years I've come to this building and I come in at 6 in the morning and then I write music for myself until about 9. And then, everybody shows up and we work on the things we're supposed to work on that day. And then the next day I come back and it's 6, and there's a bunch of it that I thought was interesting enough to put in this book. So it'll accompany all these images of cards.
Does it have a name?
The book? The working title right now is Why Are We Here?
Why are we here, Mark?
Well, you're probably going to look at the book and say, well, he doesn't know. That's for sure. But, it's the question.
Well, and let's end on that question, and everyone can think about why we are here, because it is one of the great mysteries.
All right. I got one last question for you.
Okay.
What are you working on these days, Beatie?
Well, Mark, I'm working on a brain installation that's going to be at the London Design Biennale next year. It's a way of taking people inside the artist's brain and having them explore it and all the different channels. And so actually the channels I'm working on directly correlate with the different aspects like memory or visual arts or communications. And then the way it's going to be presented, which is probably too much of an explanation for now, but it's this thinking cap. So people will be able to put on the thinking cap and hear what's going on in the brain. And the data of each channel will actually be encoded in diamonds, man-made diamonds, as the first time this has ever been done, as the most durable material you can store data in. So it will be preserved for 10,000 years, this art piece, which is kind of interesting.
Man, that's gonna be interesting to everybody. I think even the Kardashians will want to know more about this.
They are on the top of my list. That's the only people I want some feedback from.
Oh, so. we need a diamond encrusted thinking cap. We like that idea.
Yeah, that's what's going on in my brain right now.
Wait a minute. Are you saying we get to find out what's going on in your brain if we...
Oh, yeah.
Huh. Okay, I might have to go to London just for this. I'm curious.
You're in my brain, Mark. You'll find yourself in my brain.
Oh, okay. Oh.
It's all just poems to Mark.
Oh, well, maybe you just saved me a plane ticket.
Okay. This program was produced by Dublab and supported by New Music USA and featured on NewMusicBox. Additional programs and more details available at newmusicusa.org and dublab.com.